To pause and reflect on the grief and loss that continues to be felt by so many people. Geraint Vincent has our report on a nation's tribute.
How to mark a year of sorrow. At midday, a minute's silence across the United Kingdom and in the places which used to bustle with life before the pandemic struck, a stillness in which to remember all who've been lost. There are some places, of course, which haven't stopped at all these past 12 months. The hospitals, where they have fought day and night to preserve human life. The Queen sent flowers to St Bart's in London, and she wrote of the immeasurable service of those who have supported us.
Whatever our faith or philosophy may be, let us take a moment together to remember those who have been lost, to give thanks for their lives, and to acknowledge the inexpressible pain of parting. In their memory, let us resolve to work for a future inspired by our highest values that have been displayed so clearly by the people of this country through this most challenging of times.
This has been a strange year too, filled with countless personal struggles as the virus has emptied our workplaces and we have been confined to our homes. Lockdown has made the process of grieving so much harder. The people who loved Del Radway are still waiting to mourn him properly.
I mean, within the Caribbean community, there's something which we call 9 nights, and that's normally 9 nights after the person has passed, you know, where people come together again and celebrate. All of those things have been taken away from people, and you feel this sense of loneliness and isolation because you're not able to grieve with family and friends as you've been able to in the past.
On a hillside in the Rhondda, Bev and her family have built a lasting memorial to her mum, Sheila.
It's definitely helped the grieving process. I feel like I'm doing something because you haven't got a chance to grieve at the moment. In the funerals, you can't grieve in the funerals, you can't grieve after.
The virus hasn't finished taking its toll, of course, but we have become better protected now in a year when so much has been learned as well as lost. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
Well, this National Day of Remembrance is being led by Marie Curie. It's joined up with many other charities and organisations, helping us all to reflect on our loss and to help support those who've been bereaved. Well, tonight at 8 o'clock, we're being asked to stand on our doorsteps with candles, torches or simply lights from our mobile phones for a second minute of silence. Actor Jim Carter, known to millions of us as Carson from Downton Abbey, is an ambassador for Marie Curie and joins me now. Jim, thanks very much for speaking to me this lunchtime. A year ago, we never could have imagined what terrible suffering people would face.
Not at all, Kylie. I mean, at 12 o'clock, I'm on home alone at the moment. I stepped out into the garden for a moment by myself and I just thought, a year ago, we went into lockdown not knowing what it meant, but with an air of we're all in this together and isn't it amazing? We can hear the birds and it's silent. And now a year later, we realise what the pandemic has meant to so many people, how it's impacted on everybody's lives, either through personal loss or the loss of livelihood, the mental stress. And the reality is far worse than we could have imagined. That's why I think it's important, and Marie Curie started this initiative to have a day of reflection, to go out with our torches tonight, to shine a little beacon of hope into the future and maybe just shine a light on our ability to reset and reassess our situation and give thanks for those people who have helped us through this awkward, terrible situation.
Do you think we're actually processing the loss that we've been through? And how important is it that we share our collective loss?
I think it's really important. That's the best way to process it, because we've been denied that sharing. So I read a quote today saying grief is love with nowhere to go. People haven't been able to grieve, as your previous contributor said. They haven't been able to get together, to hug each other, to think about their loved ones. So I think let's not be driven apart as we edge out of the pandemic. Let's cling together, because we've shown that the best of us has been shown by those people, the delivery drivers, the bus drivers, the frontline workers, the nurses, the doctors, the care home workers, who actually kept going and kept us all going. The way forward is to cling together.
You're right, yeah. And I mean, let's be honest, we are terrible at talking about death in this country, aren't we?
I mean, Marie Curie, that's one of their strengths. They say, let's talk about death. It doesn't bring it any closer. It just makes the process easier if you can prepare yourself, prepare your family for it. Not hopefully, the pandemic has shown us the need for that. Marie Curie are brilliant about that, about bereavement. And if people want to get in touch and get some help, get onto their website and ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't go through this on your own. There is help at hand from experts.
Jim, just finally, I wonder how you would suggest that you begin some of those conversations, because often it can feel easier to avoid those sometimes awkward conversations about death.
I think the way to start it is just on simple things, like saying to someone, what music, if you die, when you die, we're all going to die, what music would you like at the funeral? Or do you know if you want to be buried or cremated, or what service you want to have? Just a simple thing like that about pragmatic details can trigger a longer conversation about when you're gone. And it's those tiny details that at the moment of death can be really hard to deal with. So start that process early, and then it just becomes part of a natural, easier conversation.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Jim, thank you very much for speaking to us this lunchtime.
No, thank you.
Moving on now, the prospect of a summer holiday seems far off this lunchtime after the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, followed other ministers and told us it's too early to tell if anyone will be able to jet abroad for a break. Well, the earliest date the ban on international holidays could lift is the 17th of May. But from next week until the end of June, new coronavirus laws mean that anyone attempting to travel abroad could face a £5,000 fine. There are exemptions. Reasonable excuses, according to the government, include travelling for medical treatment, work or education, and buying, selling, letting or renting properties overseas. Well, our political correspondent Libby Vina is with me now for more on this. Libby, it's a year on, still major restrictions on our lives.
Yes, well, it may seem a little trivial to be talking about holidays when it is a day of national reflection, talking about all those individual tragedies. But nevertheless, one salient fact about today is that a year on from the first lockdown, we are still in lockdown. And many people are dreaming of their freedoms, getting their freedoms back. Now, when it comes to things like pubs opening up, people being allowed to meet in their gardens, well, that timetable does not seem to be slipping. But there is now a huge question mark about foreign travel. And I think that's for two reasons. First of all, there is this third wave on the continent that ministers and the Prime Minister have been talking about, a very serious situation in France, 16 departments locked down, including Paris and the Riviera. I mean, there are many places where you wouldn't really think of going on holiday at the moment. But beyond that, there is also a sensitivity that this time last year, one thing that the government didn't do was try and control our borders. And it's thought that many of the early cases of coronavirus were seeded into Britain from people coming back from their foreign holidays in France and Spain. And ministers are very sensitive to the accusation that they might be being too lax again. So there is a chance that it could slip beyond May the 17th, the first date we can go abroad. This is what the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, had to say earlier.
Well, it's too early to say whether it's going to be safe to have widespread international travel this summer. We have a piece of work called the Global Travel Task Force, which is challenged to answer this question. And we've said that there will not be international travel before the 17th of May. And after that, it'll depend on the data. And crucially, we don't want to see a rise here in the number of new variants that might not be dealt with as effectively by the vaccine.
And Libby, Mr Hancock also suggesting that it should be mandatory for care home workers to have the COVID vaccine. Pretty controversial, that.
Yes, well, in interviews this morning, he certainly didn't rule it out, and he compared it to doctors having to have hepatitis injections in order to practice. He said it's under consideration. They haven't come to a final conclusion about this, but it is hugely controversial. As you say, the Royal College of Nursing, for example, says that its members shouldn't have to have compulsory vaccinations, whether that be for COVID or influenza, for example, and care home providers, represented by the National Care Association, are concerned too. They do feel it should be voluntary.
We are still very committed to the fact that we should be trying to encourage all our staff to have this vaccine. We believe 100% will be great, but we're also very mindful that we have to make sure that staff are comfortable and have all the information necessary.
The problem is that there are still many care workers who haven't been vaccinated, despite the fact they were in the priority group. And I think ministers are concerned that care home residents are still among the most vulnerable in the population, and they see there's a disconnect there. They want to change that.
OK, Libby, thank you very much. Well, I'm joined by Dr. Sarah Jarvis, who's been with us throughout the pandemic. So, Dr. Jarvis, I'd just like to get your take on what we've been discussing there on making vaccines for care home workers mandatory.
In an ideal world, I would much prefer that everybody had a choice. But you're absolutely right that in the past, in fact, as of now, doctors and nurses who are going to be doing procedures which might mean that there is a risk of them infecting somebody with hepatitis B, which is a condition for which there is a vaccine which can completely prevent it, but for which there is no cure, and it can lead to cirrhosis, it can even lead to liver cancer. I think anybody listening would say, well, of course it's perfectly reasonable that my doctor, my nurse, shouldn't be putting me at risk. The difference, of course, with COVID is that with hepatitis, for instance, it's usually because of transfer of bodily fluids. So, for instance, if you cut yourself and you contaminated a patient that way. It's also different to flu, because with COVID, you can be infectious for a couple of days before you have any symptoms at all. While we very much encourage everybody to have the flu vaccine if they work as a frontline member of health or social care staff, most people are not very infectious until they get symptoms and are pretty much floored by it. So I do understand that people who are care home workers, who are on the whole very often very lowly paid, they've done an incredible job in this pandemic, and they're perhaps more likely to be of BAME origin, and we know there's been a lot of concern about vaccines among those groups in particular. I do understand their concerns, but I think we have to weigh that up against the fact that older people, particularly people in care homes, are very vulnerable, and while the vaccine provides excellent protection, it doesn't provide complete protection. So we still need to try and do everything we can to minimise their exposure to COVID.
Let's just pick up on holidays that we were talking about a moment ago. Are you concerned about the risk posed by people going on holiday and perhaps bringing back new variants?
Yes, I absolutely am. Unfortunately, I think that we closed down far too late at the end of August, September, when cases were starting to go up really very rapidly outside. I'm quite sure that that contributed to the rise in cases, but particularly I am worried about new variants. For instance, the South African variant is now a major player in some parts of France, and we know that the vaccine is much less effective against the South African variant in particular. A new study's just come out to say the AstraZeneca vaccine doesn't protect against mild or moderate COVID infection with that variant. So I think we really have done amazing things with our vaccines, but there is still a significant risk until the whole world is vaccinated.
We'll have to leave it there. OK, Dr. Sarah Jarvis, thank you. The First Minister of Scotland misled a Scottish Parliament committee. An investigation into the Scottish Government's unlawful handling of harassment allegations against Alex Salmond has concluded. The findings against Nicola Sturgeon are separate to those of James Hamilton, who reported yesterday there had been no breach of the ministerial code by the First Minister over her role in the saga. Court of Appeal judges have overturned the criminal convictions of a group of trade unionists, including the actor Ricky Tomlinson, after a campaign lasting more than 4 decades. 3 judges quashed the convictions, which are related to a strike of building workers in 1972 after concluding they were unsafe. Well, Mark McQuillan is at the Court of Appeal for us at this lunchtime. Mark, can you just take us through the background to this case?
Well, this dates back to 1972 and focuses on 24 trade unionists who picketed building sites in Shrewsbury during the National Builders' Strike. Now, they were charged with offences including conspiracy to intimidate and affray, and 22 of them were convicted. But there were problems with the original case. Lawyers argued that the destruction of original witness statements means their convictions were unsafe. They also said a TV documentary aired during the original trial could have influenced the jury. Now, the actor Ricky Tomlinson, before he was famous, was one of the Shrewsbury 24 and was sentenced to 2 years in jail over this. A short time ago, he gave us his reaction to today's ruling.
I don't think it should have taken 50 years for the authorities to sort of set the record straight, because this is a victory, but it's a victory for the establishment. Because what they've done, they put us in jail, and now they're saying they're sorry, they made a mistake. Well, they've known for 50 years that they've made a mistake because they put us in jail.
Well, this has been a very long wait for these 24 men, but now, nearly 50 years after their original convictions, they have successfully cleared their names here at the Court of Appeal. The judge said, by the standards of today, what occurred was unfair to the extent that the verdicts cannot be upheld, while a lawyer for the Shrewsbury 24 is calling for a public inquiry over what happened and the wider implications.
Mark McQuillan at the Court of Appeal, thank you. One of English football's great mavericks, Frank Worthington, has died at the age of 72. He played in 22 consecutive Football League seasons, scoring 266 goals for Huddersfield, Leicester and Bolton. He also won 8 England caps. Leicester City, who he played for more than 200 times, described him as one of the most entertaining players ever to represent the club. His wife Carol said Frank brought joy to so many people and that he will be greatly missed by everyone who loved him so much. Finally, this lunchtime, we began by reflecting on how life during lockdown has been so difficult for so many. In March 2020, none of us could have anticipated that we were about to face a year like no other. Today, people have been looking back through their photo libraries and sharing their memories. Sally Biddulph now on the life we enjoyed before lockdown.
What were you doing a year ago? Can you even remember before lockdown? Well, hashtag Last Normal Photo is trending on Twitter with gems like this. An early morning camel ride in Morocco. The last day of a city break to Prague before the borders closed. Or even a cycling tour of Mallorca by the Dartmoor Yoga Gang. Yes, we did have a life once, not too long ago. 8 days before lockdown, Charlotte Cater threw a baby shower. A month later, Hayley arrived. Life was always going to be different with a newborn, but not like this.
We were living with my boyfriend's parents at the time, which was good because we had that support. But for the most part, I didn't have my mum around me, and that was hard. You weren't allowed to see anyone. You just felt trapped on your own. And I'd never done it before, so I had no idea what I was doing. I was just trying to wing it, But yeah, it was hard.
Family life continued, social lives stopped. The Victoria pub in Portslade closed its doors just hours after Dano's birthday bash. And sing-songs finished too. A Stereophonics concert fell silent, and Harrogate's award-winning Chewits Silver Band gave a final fanfare. For Emma Jolly, it was bittersweet memories of her son performing with his school at the Royal Albert Hall.
It's always an emotional event anyway, but there was something about it where we kind of knew we were going to be heading into lockdown really soon. And we didn't really know what lockdown would look like. We didn't know when we would next be together again. We just had no idea.
Exercise became solitary too. The park run exiled to the past and a football match a flight of pure fantasy. But still we cling on to the memories of lives well lived and the hope of it returning to normal. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
And that's it this lunchtime. Mary will be here with the evening news at 6:30. The latest Where You Are follows the national weather. But from everyone here, enjoy your afternoon. Bye for now.